Sometimes the ones we trust the most can lead us into the darkest corners of betrayal. Imagine agreeing to something out of love and trust, only for it to shatter your world. This is the story of how one night changed everything, a tale of betrayal, boundaries crossed, and consequences that no one could have foreseen. Stay till the end, because this story takes a turn you won't expect. It all started on an ordinary evening. My husband and I had settled into the rhythm of our life together, comfortable, predictable, and, in some ways, a little too safe. We had been married for a few years, and like many couples, we had our fair share of ups and downs, but I believed we had a strong foundation built on trust and love. That evening, we were sitting at the dinner table talking about our day. Everything felt normal until he said something that would change everything. He casually brought up an idea, something I would never have expected from him. At first, it didn't even register in my mind. He was serious, but I thought he was joking. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice calm but with a certain edge I hadn't heard before. "I want you to spend a night with another man, a black man, just once. For us. For me." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. I looked at him, trying to process the words he had just said. Was he serious? My heart pounded in my chest as my mind raced. It felt like the room was spinning, but his eyes were steady, waiting for a response. At that moment, I didn't know what to say. I wanted to shout, to question him, to ask if he had lost his mind. But instead, I stayed silent, my breath catching in my throat. He could tell I was confused, maybe even a little shocked. He quickly explained, his words almost rehearsed, like he had been thinking about this for a while. "It's just a fantasy, something to spice things up, and something we can share together. You trust me, don't you?" But those words didn't reassure me. Something felt off, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and one wrong move would send me tumbling. Why would he ask this of me? Was I not enough for him? Did I need to prove my love in this way? The more I thought about it, the more questions kept coming to mind, but I didn't want to react too quickly. I didn't want to accuse him of anything, not without understanding his reasoning. So I did the only thing I could do at the time. I agreed to think about it. But deep inside, a small voice told me that saying yes to this could lead to something I wasn't prepared for. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. After all, he was my husband, the man I trusted with my heart. He wouldn't want to hurt me, would he? Days passed, but the idea lingered in my mind like a dark cloud. No matter how hard I tried to push it away, it kept resurfacing, haunting my thoughts, my dreams, and even the moments I thought were normal. It wasn't just the suggestion that was bothering me. It was the way he had looked at me when he said it, like this was something we were meant to do, something that would somehow make us closer. I spent hours questioning myself. What was wrong with me? Why did this feel so wrong? I told myself it was just a fantasy, something that didn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. Maybe I was overthinking it. After all, people experiment in relationships all the time, right? It could be harmless, just one night, a one-time thing, but the more I tried to rationalize it, the more the discomfort grew. I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something deeper was at play here, something I wasn't fully understanding. Then, a week later, he brought it up again. It wasn't a casual mention this time, but an urgent plea. "I've been thinking about it," he said, his voice soft but persistent. "What do you think? It's just one night. I'm sure it'll bring us closer. We'll be stronger for it. Don't you trust me?" His words sounded so convincing, like this was the key to something we both needed, but the pit in my stomach only deepened. Trust. Was this what it came down to? trusting him enough to let go of my discomfort. I felt trapped. Part of me didn't want to let him down, didn't want to disappoint him or appear unsupportive. After all, I had promised him I'd think about it. But another part of me, the part that knew something wasn't right, wanted to scream, to run away from it all. He could sense my hesitation. His expression softened, almost pleading. "I love you, and I want you to know how much I trust you," he said. "This isn't about me wanting someone else. It's about exploring something together." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that this was just some harmless fantasy. Maybe I was being too dramatic. It was just one night. One night wouldn't change anything, right? So, against my better judgment, I agreed. It felt like the right thing to do, at least in that moment. I tried to push away the fear and doubts. I told myself I was doing it out of love, out of trust, and to make our relationship stronger. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this decision would haunt me. The night arrived and everything felt surreal. My heart was pounding as I stood in front of the mirror, nervously adjusting my outfit. I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. The entire situation felt like something I wasn't ready for, something that shouldn't have been happening. But I had promised him I would go through with it. I had agreed, and now I had to see it through. As I looked at myself, I tried to calm my racing thoughts. "It's just one night," I whispered to myself. "One night won't change anything." But no matter how many times I repeated it, the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. I couldn't escape the sinking feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. When I entered the living room, my husband was already there, waiting. He looked calm, almost too calm, but there was a certain intensity in his eyes. He smiled at me, and it almost felt reassuring. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. There was something behind them, something I couldn't quite read. He told me the man would be arriving soon, and I was to wait in the bedroom. I didn't want to do this anymore. I wanted to tell him I couldn't go through with it, that I had changed my mind. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not after everything he had said, not after I had already agreed. I felt trapped in a decision I wasn't sure I wanted to make. When the doorbell rang, my heart skipped a beat. The man was here. He was a friend of my husband's, someone I had met a few times before, always friendly, always polite. But tonight I wasn't sure who he was. He wasn't just a friend anymore. Tonight he was a stranger. My husband introduced us with ease, but I couldn't look at him the same way. I felt my hands tremble as I shook his. He was taller than I remembered, and his presence was strong, overpowering. We exchanged pleasantries, but the tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. He seemed kind, respectful even, and I tried to remind myself that this wasn't about him. It was about my husband, about fulfilling what he wanted. But that didn't make it any easier. Every part of me felt uncomfortable, like I didn't belong in this situation. As the evening went on, it became harder to ignore the discomfort growing inside me. My husband had disappeared into the background, leaving the two of us alone. I was left with the man who was supposed to be a part of the plan, but instead felt like an intruder in my own life. He was patient, giving me space, trying to make me feel comfortable, but nothing felt right. It was as if everything was happening in slow motion, like I was watching someone else live out my life. I couldn't help but wonder where my husband was. Why had he left us alone like this? He had been so eager for this moment, but now that it was happening, he seemed to have vanished. I didn't know what to feel anymore. Was he watching? Was this really about trust, or was it something deeper, something more troubling? The night stretched on, and I found myself questioning everything. The boundaries that had once been so clear between us were now blurred, and I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The line between love and betrayal seemed so thin now. and with every passing moment it became harder to tell which side of it I was on. The next morning felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I had barely slept, my mind racing all night long. I couldn't remember most of what had happened, only flashes, moments of discomfort, of guilt, and of confusion. But there was one thing I couldn't forget: the look on my husband's face when he returned in the morning, as if everything was perfectly fine. He had a satisfied, almost relieved expression, like he was pleased with how things had gone. But I wasn't. I couldn't even bring myself to look at him. I just wanted the night to vanish from my memory, to somehow undo the choices I had made. I got out of bed quietly, moving through the house like a ghost. He followed me, his voice soft but persistent. "How do you feel?" he asked, like nothing had changed, like nothing was wrong. How did I feel? I didn't even know how to answer that. There were so many emotions swirling inside me: anger, hurt, confusion, and a deep sense of betrayal. But the worst part, I didn't just feel betrayed by the man who had once been my partner in life. I felt betrayed by myself. I finally gathered the courage to confront him, to demand the answers I had been too afraid to ask. "Why?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why would you ask me to do something like that? What were you hoping to gain from this?" He seemed unfazed by my question, his expression unchanging. "It's just a fantasy, something I've always wanted to try," he said, as if it was no big deal. "I didn't think it would be such a big issue." A big issue? I could feel the tears starting to burn at the back of my eyes, but I fought them back. "It's not just a big issue, it's everything. You asked me to betray myself. You asked me to cross a line that I can't take back. And you're acting like it was just some harmless game." He took a deep breath, looking away. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought it would make things better. We could be closer, more open with each other." But that wasn't the truth. Not really. I could see it now. The pieces were falling into place. It wasn't about love or trust or any of the things he had said. It was about control. He wanted to see how far I would go to prove my love, to prove my trust. And in the process, he had broken something inside me. The cold truth hit me like a ton of bricks. He had been unfaithful. I didn't want to admit it, but everything pointed to it. His insistence on this night, his excitement, his calm demeanor afterward, it was all a mask. He wasn't the man I had married. I confronted him with what I suspected. "How long?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "How long have you been seeing someone else?" His face dropped, and for the first time I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "It's been a while," he admitted, his voice flat, detached. "But this isn't about that. This is about you and me, and what we've been missing." It didn't matter anymore. The moment those words left his mouth, everything between us shattered. The trust, the love, everything we had built was gone. I stood there, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. I didn't recognize him. I didn't recognize us. The man I had loved, the man I thought I knew, had become a stranger. And I didn't know how to live with that. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I had to leave. I had to walk away from this broken version of my marriage, from this person who had destroyed everything we had built, and it was going to hurt. But it was the only choice left. Leaving wasn't easy. It never is, especially when you've invested so much of yourself into something, into someone. But as I walked out the door that day, I knew it was the only way forward. I had spent months questioning my choices, doubting myself, wondering if I was making the right decision. But standing in the quiet aftermath of everything that had happened, it was clear I had to choose myself. The hardest part wasn't the leaving, it was realizing that I had allowed myself to be manipulated. I had let someone else's desires and fantasies take priority over my own well-being. my own boundaries. And it wasn't just about what happened that night, it was about everything that led up to it. The lies, the betrayal, the cold detachment. I wasn't just walking away from a marriage, I was walking away from the person I had become in that marriage, the person I had let myself be. For days I stayed in a fog of hurt and disbelief. My heart felt broken, my trust shattered, and yet deep down, I knew this was the beginning of something new. It had to be. I had to rebuild, not just my life, but my sense of self. I had to remind myself that I was worthy of respect, of love, and of honesty. That I didn't need to sacrifice my dignity for anyone, not even for someone I thought would always have my back. The healing process wasn't linear. There were days when I wanted to call him, to go back to the life I knew, even if it wasn't perfect. But those days grew fewer, and I found myself feeling stronger with each passing one. I spent time reconnecting with my friends, my family, and, most importantly, myself. I rediscovered parts of me that had been buried for too long. The person I had lost in that marriage was still there, waiting to be found again. And slowly the anger faded. It was replaced with a quiet understanding. The pain, though sharp at first, began to dull. I realized that, in a way, this experience had taught me something important. It taught me the value of my own boundaries, the importance of my own voice, and how necessary it is to listen to my gut, even when I'm scared of what the truth might mean. I learned that betrayal isn't just about what someone else does. It's about how you respond to it. I had the power to choose my response, to choose my healing, and I chose to let go of the past and move forward no matter how uncertain the future seemed. It wasn't easy, it wasn't simple, but it was necessary. And in the end, I found peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from someone else's promises, but the kind that comes from within. The kind that's built on self-respect, on reclaiming my power, and on knowing that I deserve better than what I had settled for. Life doesn't always turn out the way we expect it to, but sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most beautiful new beginnings. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be, moving forward, stronger and free.